On a visit to collect the rent, a millionaire man discovers a 7-year-old girl taking care of her sick mother, mopping the floor and not having eaten for days, which has left all the neighbors in shock. If this story interested you, subscribe to our channel. Don't forget to like this video and tell us which city you're watching us from. We'll keep going. The scorching summer sun painted long shadows across Edison Avenue as Alexander Montgomery's Mercedes pulled up to the modest rental house at number 247. The real estate mogul adjusted his Italian silk tie, a habit born of years attending high-stakes business meetings. This visit was supposed to be routine, just another stop to collect overdue rent. Yet something about this particular afternoon would forever alter the course of his life. The weathered door stood slightly ajar, an unusual sight that made Alexander pause. The neighborhood wasn't exactly upscale, but his tenants typically maintained better security. As he approached, the sound of scrubbing reached his ears, accompanied by soft humming, a melancholic tune that seemed out of place in the afternoon heat. "Hello?" he called out, pushing the door open wider. The sight that greeted him stopped him in his tracks. A tiny figure knelt on the worn linoleum floor, her small hands gripping a frayed cloth as she scrubbed with determination. She couldn't have been more than 7 years old, her dark hair tied back in a messy ponytail, wearing clothes that had clearly seen better days. The girl looked up, revealing eyes that carried wisdom far beyond her years. She didn't seem startled by his presence, merely resigned, as if unexpected visitors were just another challenge in her daily routine. "Good afternoon, sir," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, yet carrying a surprising amount of composure. "Are you here about the rent?" Alexander found himself momentarily speechless. In 15 years of managing properties, he had never encountered anything quite like this. The girl stood up, wiping her hands on her faded dress, and reached for an envelope on the nearby counter. Her movements were methodical, practiced, as if she had been handling adult responsibilities for years, rather than playing with dolls like other children her age. "I'm Sophie," she introduced herself, holding out the envelope. "We're a little short this month, but I've been taking in extra sewing work. Mrs. Peterson from number 253 promised to pay me for fixing her curtains by Friday. I can bring the rest then." The businessman accepted the envelope automatically, his mind struggling to process the situation. The living room, despite its obvious poverty, was meticulously clean. Carefully patched curtains hung at the windows, and a collection of sewing materials was neatly arranged on a small table in the corner. This was clearly Sophie's workspace, a child's attempt at running a household. A harsh coughing sound from deeper within the house drew Sophie's attention. "Excuse me," she said politely, already turning toward the noise. "Mom needs her medicine." She moved with the efficiency of a practiced caregiver, pulling a bottle from a shelf and filling a glass with water. Alexander followed her, his expensive shoes silent on the clean floor. The bedroom door was open, revealing a wan woman propped up on pillows. Emily Turner, he recalled from the rental agreement. She had been a reliable tenant until 3 months ago, when the payments started becoming irregular. "Mr. Montgomery," Emily managed between coughs, "I apologize for not getting up." Her face was pale, marked by illness, but her eyes held the same dignified determination he had seen in her daughter. Sophie was already by her side, helping her take the medicine with a tenderness that made Alexander's chest tighten. The scene before him challenged everything he thought he knew about his business. Here was a child shouldering burdens that would crush most adults, doing so with grace and resilience that defied explanation. The envelope in his pocket, which he knew contained less than half the required amount, suddenly felt impossibly heavy. A commotion outside drew their attention. Through the thin walls came the sharp voice of Gertrude Wilkins, the neighborhood's self-appointed moral guardian. "It's not right," she was saying loudly to someone. "A child that age, all alone with a sick woman. Someone ought to do something about it." Sophie's shoulders tensed, but she didn't stop arranging her mother's pillows. The practiced way she ignored the comments suggested this wasn't the first time she'd heard such things. Emily reached for her daughter's hand, their fingers intertwining in a gesture that spoke of shared battles and unspoken fears. Alexander found himself standing straighter, his business instincts warring with something else. something he hadn't felt in years. He watched as Sophie moved around the room adjusting curtains and straightening blankets, her small figure casting a long shadow in the afternoon light. She was simultaneously a child and not a child, inhabiting a world between innocence and responsibility that shouldn't exist. The following days haunted Alexander Montgomery in ways he couldn't explain. The image of Sophie's determined little face followed him into board meetings and charity galas, making the champagne taste bitter and the small talk seem even more meaningless than usual. He found himself driving past 247 Edison Avenue more often than necessary, watching as Sophie hung laundry or carried her sewing basket to make deliveries. The contrast between his world and hers couldn't have been starker. While he attended business lunches in five-star restaurants, Sophie was carefully portioning out simple meals to make them last longer. As he signed million-dollar contracts, she counted pennies from her sewing work, recording every cent in a carefully maintained notebook with handwriting that was too neat for someone so young. One particular morning, Alexander arrived at his office to find his sister, Victoria, waiting with a concerned expression. "The board is talking, Alex," she said without preamble. "Word got out about your interest in that rental property on Edison Avenue. People are wondering if you're losing your edge." He loosened his tie, suddenly feeling constrained. "Since when does checking on our investments count as losing my edge?" Victoria's perfectly manicured nails tapped against his mahogany desk. "Don't play naive, brother. 3 separate sources told me you've been seen there almost daily. You even carried groceries to the door yesterday. That's not checking on investments. That's getting personally involved. And personal involvement is bad for business." Alexander turned to the floor-to-ceiling windows of his office, looking out over the city he'd helped build. His real estate empire stretched across several states, yet he couldn't stop thinking about one small house and its remarkable residents. "Maybe it's time we redefined what's good for business," he said quietly. His sister's heels clicked sharply as she approached. "Alex, I know that look. You're planning something. Whatever it is, remember that we have shareholders to answer to. The Montgomery name stands for something in this city." As if to underscore Victoria's warning, his phone buzzed with a message from Gerald Watson, one of his oldest friends and business partners. "Heard disturbing rumors. Need to talk ASAP about Edison Avenue situation." The situation, as Gerald called it, had grown more complex over the past week. Sophie's small sewing business had begun attracting attention in the neighborhood. Despite Gertrude Wilkins' ongoing campaign of whispered concerns and pointed remarks, other residents had started bringing their mending to the little girl with the steady hands and serious eyes. Alexander had witnessed it himself, the careful way Sophie handled each garment, the professional manner in which she discussed repairs with clients 3 or 4 times her age. She had even created a simple pricing system, written in careful block letters and posted beside her workspace. Buttons, $2, hemming, $5, patches, $3. The scene in the small house had changed as well. Emily's condition seemed to be worsening, requiring more frequent medical attention. Yet Sophie maintained her composure, adapting her routine to include trips to the pharmacy and longer hours at her sewing table. The sight of her tiny figure bent over her work, illuminated by a single lamp late into the evening, had become both inspiring and heartbreaking. Gertrude Wilkins wasn't the only one watching. Alexander had noticed increased attention from social services, their car appearing more frequently on Edison Avenue. Each visit left Sophie more determined, her shoulders squared against the weight of adult scrutiny and judgment. That afternoon, as he left another tense meeting with his board of directors, Alexander made an impulsive decision. Instead of heading to his penthouse apartment, he drove to Edison Avenue. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the neighborhood, when he pulled up to number 247. Sophie was outside, carefully hanging freshly washed medical supplies on a clothesline. She acknowledged his presence with a small nod, her movements never faltering. "Good evening, Mr. Montgomery," she said, reaching for another piece of laundry. "I have most of last month's rent ready. Just need to finish Mrs. Anderson's dress alterations tomorrow." But Alexander wasn't there for the rent. He watched as this extraordinary child continued her work, her small hands steady and sure. In that moment, he made a decision that would change not only his life, but the lives of everyone on Edison Avenue. The business world might not understand, his sister might object, and his board might question his judgment. But Alexander Montgomery had seen something in Sophie that transcended balance sheets and profit margins. The morning light filtered through the threadbare curtains of Sophie's workspace as she carefully pressed the seam of Mrs. Anderson's dress. The rhythmic movement of the iron, borrowed from kind Mrs. Martinez next door, had become almost meditative. At 7 years old, Sophie had mastered the art of multitasking, listening for her mother's breathing in the next room while completing her sewing orders. A knock at the door interrupted her concentration. Setting the iron upright, Sophie approached the entrance with measured steps, her mother's warnings about strangers echoing in her mind. Through the peephole, she recognized Mr. Montgomery's tall figure, but he wasn't alone. A well-dressed woman stood beside him, her posture rigid and expression guarded. "Good morning, Sophie," Alexander greeted as she opened the door. "This is my sister Victoria. She wanted to meet you." The introduction carried an undercurrent of tension that even Sophie's young mind could detect. Victoria Montgomery's scrutiny was immediate and intense. Her eyes traveled from Sophie's carefully braided hair to her worn but clean shoes, taking in every detail of the child who had supposedly captured her brother's attention. "So," she said, her voice carefully neutral, "you're the little seamstress I've been hearing about." Sophie straightened her shoulders, meeting Victoria's gaze with the same dignity she brought to all her adult interactions. "Would you like to see my work, ma'am? I just finished reinforcing the hem on Mrs. Anderson's evening dress." Something flickered across Victoria's face, surprise perhaps at the child's professional demeanor. She followed Sophie to the small sewing area, where projects in various stages of completion were neatly organized. The evening dress hung on a makeshift mannequin, its hem perfectly even. "You did this yourself?" Victoria asked, running a manicured finger along the stitching. Her tone had shifted from skeptical to curious. "Yes, ma'am, Mom taught me before." Sophie's voice trailed off, but she quickly recovered. "I use a double stitch for durability. It takes longer, but the repairs last better that way." Alexander watched the interaction with barely concealed hope. He knew his sister's influence could either smooth or completely block the path he was considering. Victoria's opinion carried weight not just with the board, but with the entire social circle that formed the backbone of their business empire. A harsh coughing sound from the bedroom drew everyone's attention. Sophie moved with practiced efficiency, excusing herself to attend to her mother. Through the partially open door, Victoria and Alexander could see the girl administering medicine, adjusting pillows, and speaking soft words of comfort. "She's 7, Alex," Victoria said quietly, but her usual sharp edge had softened. 7 years old and running a household. How long has this been going on? Before Alexander could respond, a commotion outside drew their attention. Gertrude Wilkins stood on her porch next door, engaged in what appeared to be an intense conversation with a man in a government-issued vehicle. The words child services and investigation carried clearly through the thin walls. Sophie returned to the room, her face composed, but her hands clasped tightly together. "Mr. Montgomery," she said, her voice smaller than usual, "I have the rest of the rent money. Mrs. Anderson paid for her dress alterations." She moved to retrieve an envelope from a carefully maintained cash box. Victoria stepped forward, intercepting the child's movement. For a moment, she studied Sophie's face. The dark circles under her eyes, the determination in her jaw, the worry lines that no child should have. Then, to Alexander's surprise, his usually strictly professional sister knelt down to Sophie's level. "Tell me about your sewing business," Victoria said, her voice gentler than Alexander had heard in years. "How do you manage your bookkeeping?" Sophie's face brightened slightly. She retrieved a notebook filled with careful columns of income and expenses, each entry written in precise childish handwriting. Victoria examined the simple but effective accounting system with growing amazement. Outside, Gertrude Wilkins' voice rose again, her words clearly intended to carry. It's not natural, a child that age taking on such responsibility. Something must be done. Alexander watched as Sophie's shoulders tensed, but she continued explaining her business system to Victoria. The girl's resilience was remarkable, yet he could see the toll it was taking. Every harsh word from outside, every worried glance toward her mother's room, every careful calculation in her notebook. It was all too much for such young shoulders to bear. Victoria closed the notebook and stood up, smoothing her designer skirt. She gave Alexander a long look, one he recognized from countless business negotiations. But before she could speak, a new sound filled the house. Emily had begun coughing again, this time more severely than before. Sophie moved toward the bedroom, but Victoria gently caught her arm. "Let my brother check on your mother," she said, surprising both Sophie and Alexander. "Show me more about how you organize your sewing projects." As Alexander hurried to Emily's room, he heard Victoria asking Sophie about her pricing strategy and customer base. His sister's business mind was already at work, seeing past the surface of their situation to the remarkable spirit beneath. Outside, Gertrude Wilkins continued her conversation with the social services representative, but inside this small house, something significant was shifting. Victoria Montgomery's driver was puzzled when she instructed him to return to Edison Avenue the following day. The sleek black car seemed out of place among the modest homes, but Victoria paid no attention to the curious glances from neighbors as she strode purposefully toward number 247, carrying a large leather portfolio. Sophie answered the door promptly, clearly surprised to see the elegant businesswoman again. "Good morning, Miss Montgomery," she said, stepping aside to let Victoria enter. The living room had been transformed into a makeshift medical space, with Emily resting on the couch, looking more fragile than the day before. "I've been thinking about your business model," Victoria announced, settling herself at Sophie's small work table. "Your organizational skills are impressive, but there's potential for expansion." She opened her portfolio, revealing professional-looking documents and fabric swatches. Sophie's eyes widened as Victoria laid out her vision. The businesswoman had spent the night developing a plan that could transform the child's small sewing operation into something sustainable. "You have a natural talent for this," Victoria explained, her corporate facade softening as she watched. Sophie examined the fabric samples with expert hands. "These are beautiful," Sophie whispered, running her fingers over a piece of fine silk. "But I couldn't afford materials like these." Victoria's smile held a hint of her brother's warmth. "That's where we come in. The Montgomery Foundation typically focuses on large-scale urban development, but we've been looking to diversify our community outreach programs." From the couch, Emily watched the interaction with a mixture of hope and trepidation. Her daughter's face had lit up in a way she hadn't seen in months, but experience had taught her that good things often came with hidden costs. The morning progressed with Victoria explaining basic business concepts that Sophie absorbed with remarkable speed. The girl's natural intelligence shone through as she quickly grasped ideas about inventory management and profit margins that would have challenged many adults. Their discussion was interrupted by the arrival of Mrs. Martinez, carrying a covered dish. The kind-hearted neighbor had been bringing food regularly, one of the few members of the community who had chosen support over judgment. She paused in the doorway, clearly surprised to find Victoria Montgomery in her elegant business suit sitting at the humble sewing table. "Sophie, cariño," Mrs. Martinez said, recovering quickly. "I brought some soup for your mama." She moved to the kitchen, speaking softly in Spanish, her words carrying warmth and encouragement. Victoria watched the interaction thoughtfully. The neighborhood dynamics were becoming clearer. There were allies here, people who saw past circumstances to recognize Sophie's extraordinary nature. It was a microcosm of the larger business world she knew so well, where success often depended on identifying and nurturing potential. The afternoon brought another visitor, Gerald. Watson, Alexander's business partner, arriving unannounced with concern etched on his features. He stopped short at the sight of Victoria sitting comfortably in the modest living room, surrounded by fabric samples and business plans. "Vicky?" Gerald's confusion was evident. "What are you doing here? The board meeting starts in an hour." "Gerald?" "Perfect timing," Victoria replied smoothly. "Come meet Sophie Turner, our newest community investment." She gestured to the child, who had instinctively moved closer to her mother's side at the new arrival. Gerald's expression shifted from confusion to understanding as he observed the scene, the neat workspace, the organized accounts, the professional manner of this remarkable child. He had come to convince Victoria to stop whatever charity project her brother had conceived, but something in Sophie's steady gaze made him pause. "Investment, you say?" He moved closer, noting the quality of work displayed on Sophie's table. "Tell me more about this business of yours, young lady." As Sophie explained her operation, Gerald's business mind began to see what the Montgomery siblings had already recognized. This wasn't just about charity or community service. There was real potential here, a chance to create something meaningful while addressing legitimate business interests. Outside, Gertrude Wilkins watched the parade of expensive cars with growing agitation. Her campaign to protect the child had taken an unexpected turn. The arrival of social services hadn't produced the results she'd anticipated, and now the Montgomery family seemed to be rallying around the very situation she had hoped to disrupt. Inside, Victoria was showing Sophie how to create proper business cards. The design was simple but elegant, reading Sophie's seamstress services in tasteful script. For the first time, Sophie's informal business was taking on a legitimate form, backed by one of the city's most powerful families. Emily watched from her place on the couch, tears gathering in her eyes. Her daughter's face glowed with pride as she held her first business card, and for a moment, the weight of illness and worry seemed to lift. Victoria caught the mother's eye and gave a subtle nod, a promise between women that transcended social barriers and spoke of protection, opportunity, and hope. The transformation of Sophie's small sewing corner into a proper workspace happened gradually over the next few weeks. Victoria had insisted on maintaining the humble charm of the space while making it more functional. A proper sewing machine, not too industrial but significantly more reliable than Sophie's old one, now sat beside a well-lit workstation. Organized shelves held fabrics of various qualities, allowing Sophie to offer her clients more options while keeping her affordable services available. The change that touched Sophie most deeply, however, wasn't the equipment or materials. It was the arrival of Mrs. Rosa Hernandez, a skilled seamstress from the local community college, who came 3 afternoons a week to mentor Sophie. Victoria had arranged the lessons as part of the Montgomery Foundation's new community initiative. But the relationship that developed between the elderly seamstress and her young apprentice went far beyond professional instruction. "Mira, pequeña," Mrs. Hernandez would say, her weathered hands guiding Sophie's smaller ones through complex stitching patterns. "Feel the fabric speak to you. Every material has its own voice, its own story to tell." Sophie absorbed these lessons with her characteristic intensity, but under Mrs. Hernandez's gentle guidance, something new began to emerge. Moments of childlike joy breaking through her serious demeanor. The sound of her genuine laughter, though still rare, brought tears to Emily's eyes the first time she heard it. One particularly busy afternoon, as Sophie worked on a special order for one of Victoria's society friends, Alexander arrived with an unexpected proposition. He watched the girl work for a few moments before speaking, noting how she had incorporated Mrs. Hernandez's techniques into her own style. "Sophie," he said, sitting down in the chair they now kept near her workstation for visitors, "how would you feel about teaching others what you know?" The needle paused mid-stitch as Sophie looked up, her expression curious. "Teaching? But I'm still learning myself, Mr. Montgomery." Alexander smiled, remembering Victoria's words from their last board meeting. Sometimes the best teachers are those who understand the struggle of learning. He explained his idea, a program where Sophie could share her basic sewing skills with other children from the neighborhood, particularly those whose families could benefit from learning practical repair and alteration techniques. "You wouldn't be alone," he assured her, noting the slight widening of her eyes. Mrs. Hernandez has already agreed to supervise, and your mother could watch from her new reclining chair. He gestured to the comfortable medical chair that had mysteriously appeared in the corner of the room last week, another of Victoria's business investments. The mention of her mother brought a thoughtful look to Sophie's face. Emily had been having better days lately, partly due to the new medical specialist Victoria had coincidentally heard about. The doctor made house calls, reducing Emily's exhausting trips to the hospital, and seemed genuinely invested in improving her quality of life, rather than just managing symptoms. "Could we start small?" Sophie asked, her practical nature asserting itself. "Maybe just 2 or 3 students at first." Before Alexander could respond, a commotion outside drew their attention. Gertrude Wilkins stood on the sidewalk, engaged in what appeared to be a heated discussion with Mrs. Martinez and several other neighbors, their voices carried through the open window. "It's not right," Gertrude insisted, her voice sharp with frustration. "All these changes, these fancy people coming and going. What happens when they lose interest? That child needs stability, not charity." Mrs. Martinez's response was firm but measured. "What that child needs is support, Gertrude. Something you might understand if you spent more time helping and less time judging." The exchange was interrupted by the arrival of a sleek car carrying another of Victoria's society friends, come to pick up a custom alteration. The well-dressed woman swept past the gathered neighbors, entering Sophie's workspace with an air of practiced elegance. "Sophie, darling," she called out, then stopped short at the sight of Alexander. "Oh, Mr. Montgomery, I didn't expect... Well, Victoria said you were personally involved in this project, but..." Alexander watched as Sophie professionally handled the interaction, showing the woman her completed work and accepting payment with proper documentation, all skills Victoria had carefully taught her. The society woman left beaming, already talking on her phone about the amazing little seamstress on Edison Avenue. As the afternoon light softened, more neighbors began dropping by, some out of curiosity, others with genuine interest in the proposed children's program. Even Mrs. Wilkins lingered on the periphery, her expression conflicted as she watched young Amy Peterson excitedly discuss learning to sew with Sophie. The day ended with Sophie sitting beside her mother's chair, sharing a quiet moment as Mrs. Hernandez tidied up the workspace. The elderly seamstress hummed softly as she moved about, her presence adding a gentle harmony to the peaceful scene. Alexander, preparing to leave, paused in the doorway, struck by the tableau before him. A moment of perfect balance between responsibility and childhood, between old wounds and new beginnings. The inaugural class of Sophie's sewing circle, as Mrs. Hernandez had dubbed it, gathered on a bright Saturday morning. 4 children, ranging from ages 8 to 12, sat at the newly arranged workstations, their eyes wide with anticipation. Sophie stood at the front, her usual serious expression softened by an underlying excitement she couldn't quite hide. "Welcome," she began, her voice clear and steady despite her nerves. "Today we're going to learn about basic stitching." She demonstrated the threading of a needle with the precision Mrs. Hernandez had taught her, small hands moving with practiced confidence. From her corner, Emily watched with quiet pride as her daughter guided the other children through their first careful stitches. The scene before her seemed almost dreamlike, the bright, well-equipped space so different from the cramped corner where Sophie had first learned to sew. Victoria sat beside Emily, having arranged her usually packed Saturday schedule to attend this first session. "She's a natural teacher," Victoria observed softly, noting how Sophie moved from student to student, adjusting grips and offering encouragement. "Look at how she simplified Mrs. Hernandez's techniques for beginners." The morning progressed smoothly until Amy Peterson's thread became hopelessly tangled. The young girl's frustration bubbled over into tears, drawing everyone's attention. Sophie approached calmly, kneeling beside Amy's chair. "Would you like to know a secret?" Sophie asked, her voice gentle. "This happened to me all the time when I started, but look." She demonstrated a simple technique for untangling the thread, one Emily had taught her long ago. Amy's tears dried as she watched, fascinated by the methodical solution. Outside, a small crowd had gathered. Parents waited on porches, pretending not to watch through the large front window that Victoria had installed specifically for transparency. Among them stood Gertrude Wilkins, her usual scowl softening as she observed the scene inside. Mrs. Martinez approached Gertrude, offering her a cup of coffee. "Different than what you expected, no?" she asked quietly. Gertrude's response was interrupted by the arrival of Alexander, accompanied by a journalist from the local newspaper. Victoria had carefully orchestrated this coverage, ensuring it would focus on the community aspect rather than the human interest angle that might have embarrassed Sophie or Emily. The journalist, a thoughtful woman named Sarah Chen, observed the class with genuine interest. She noted how the children naturally gravitated towards Sophie, despite their age differences, how the atmosphere balanced structure with warmth. But what caught her attention most was the subtle transformation happening beyond the sewing lessons. As the morning session wound down, parents began arriving to collect their children. Each student proudly displayed their work, simple stitched patterns that would form the foundation of more complex skills. The pride in their accomplishments was matched by Sophie's quiet satisfaction in their success. Mrs. Hernandez gathered the children for a group photo, insisting that Sophie stand in the center. For a moment, the serious mask slipped and Sophie's smile illuminated her entire face. The camera captured that rare, precious moment of pure childhood joy. The parents lingered, chatting with each other and examining the class projects. Victoria noticed how naturally the conversations flowed across social boundaries that had seemed rigid just weeks ago. Mrs. Peterson, a bank executive, discussed weekend plans with Mrs. Martinez while their daughters compared stitching techniques. Even more surprising was the sight of Gertrude Wilkins tentatively approaching Emily. The two women had barely spoken since Emily's illness had become apparent, but something about the morning's success seemed to have shifted the neighborhood dynamics. "The children did well," Gertrude offered awkwardly. "Sophie, she has a gift for teaching." Emily's response was gracious, years of hurt giving way to the possibility of understanding. "Thank you, Gertrude. Would you like to stay for tea? Sophie made fresh scones this morning." Alexander watched these interactions with satisfaction, remembering the tense board meeting where he'd first proposed this community initiative. The photos being taken today would show more than just a successful youth program. They would capture the beginning of a transformation that went far beyond teaching children to sew. As the last families departed, Sophie began tidying up with her usual efficiency. But there was a new lightness in her movements, a subtle spring in her step that spoke of accomplishment rather than mere duty. She paused beside her mother's chair, accepting a gentle hug that carried volumes of unspoken pride and love. Victoria, preparing to leave, shared a meaningful look with her brother. Their investment was already yielding returns, though not the kind that could be measured in traditional business metrics. The real profit was written in the faces of the children, in the strengthening community bonds, and most importantly, in the growing instances where Sophie was allowed to simply be a child, sharing her gift with others. The discovery happened on a quiet Sunday afternoon, as Sophie organized her mother's medical documents in preparation for the specialist's next visit. Tucked between old prescription forms and insurance papers, she found a worn envelope, its edges softened by time. Inside was a collection of newspaper clippings and photographs that would change everything she thought she knew about her mother. The largest photograph showed a younger Emily standing proudly in front of a high-end fashion boutique, wearing a designer dress that she had clearly created herself. The accompanying article praised the rising star of the fashion world, describing Emily Turner as the innovative designer whose creations are taking the industry by storm. Sophie's hands trembled as she read further. Her mother had been more than just a seamstress. She had been a celebrated designer with her own successful business. The articles tracked a meteoric rise in the fashion world, ending abruptly 5 years ago with no explanation. "I see you found my old life," Emily's soft voice came from the doorway. She had been watching silently, gathering strength for a conversation she had long postponed. Moving carefully to sit beside her daughter, Emily picked up one of the photographs. This was my boutique, she explained, her finger tracing the elegant storefront. Everything I'd dreamed of since I was your age. The dresses I designed were worn at gallery openings, charity galas, even a governor's inauguration. Sophie listened intently as her mother continued, each word filling in pieces of a puzzle she hadn't known existed. But success came with expectations, compromises. The bigger the business grew, the more it demanded. The investors wanted faster production, cheaper materials, less attention to detail. Everything that went against what I believed in. Victoria Montgomery, arriving for her usual Sunday afternoon visit, paused in the hallway as she heard the conversation. She stood quietly, recognizing the importance of this moment. When I refused to compromise on quality, they found ways to pressure me, Emily continued, her voice steady despite the pain in her eyes. Eventually, they managed to force me out of my own company. The stress of the legal battles, the betrayal of people I'd trusted, that's when my health began to fail. Sophie's mind raced, connecting dots she hadn't known existed. The careful way her mother had taught her about quality over quantity, the emphasis on integrity in business dealings, they weren't just lessons, they were warnings born of hard experience. "But you never stopped creating," Sophie said softly, remembering the beautiful dresses her mother had made her before becoming too ill to sew. "You never stopped teaching me." Emily's smile was bittersweet. Because true craftsmanship, real creativity, that's something they couldn't take away. I wanted you to understand that success isn't just about money or recognition. It's about staying true to your values, even when it costs you everything. Victoria chose this moment to make her presence known, stepping into the room with uncharacteristic hesitation. The documents spread across the floor told a story she knew all too well from the business world, of talent exploited, trust betrayed, and dreams crushed by corporate greed. "Mrs. Turner," Victoria said, her professional facade softening. "I had no idea. The boutique on Fifth Avenue, Emerald Designs, that was yours?" Emily nodded, surprise flickering across her face. "You remember?" "Remember. I still have 3 of your original pieces in my closet. They're masterpieces." Victoria knelt down, examining the old photographs with new understanding. When the boutique suddenly closed, there were rumors, but nobody knew the real story. Sophie watched this exchange with growing amazement. Her mother, her quiet, ill mother who needed so much care, had once been a force in the very world Victoria Montgomery inhabited. The revelation shifted something in Sophie's understanding, not just of her mother, but of herself. "Is that why you've been so careful with my business?" Sophie asked, pieces clicking into place. "Making sure everything is properly documented, teaching me about contracts and rights." Emily reached for her daughter's hand. "I wanted to protect you, to make sure you understood both the beauty and the dangers of success. But watching you these past months, seeing how you've handled everything, you've already grown wiser than I was at twice your age." Victoria stood abruptly, her business mind whirring with possibilities. The story unfolding before her wasn't just about past tragedy. It was about redemption, about second chances. But before she could speak, Emily was seized by a coughing fit, reminding everyone of the present challenges they still faced. As Sophie efficiently helped her mother with her medication, Victoria noticed something remarkable. The girl's movements, her attention to detail, the way she balanced care with practicality. She was her mother's daughter in every way, carrying forward a legacy she hadn't even known existed until today. The afternoon light painted long shadows across the floor, across the scattered photographs of a life interrupted but not ended. In that moment, surrounded by evidence of her mother's past glory and present courage, Sophie's own path began to take on new meaning and possibility. The revelation about Emily's past sparked a transformation in the small house on Edison Avenue. Victoria, inspired by the discovery, had arrived the following morning with an unexpected proposition. She spread architectural drawings across Sophie's work table, her excitement barely contained beneath her professional demeanor. "A proper studio," she explained, pointing to the detailed plans. "Not just for the sewing classes, but for a full design workshop. We'll expand into the vacant space next door, create something that honors both the present and the past. Sophie studied the drawings with her characteristic intensity, while Emily watched from her chair, emotion playing across her features. The plans showed a thoughtfully designed space that would maintain the intimate, community-focused atmosphere they'd created while providing room for growth. The Montgomery Foundation will handle all the renovations, Victoria continued, her business-like tone softening as she turned to Emily. And we'd like you to be involved in the design process, Mrs. Turner. Your experience would be invaluable. Emily's hands trembled slightly as she reached for the drawings. You don't need to do this, she began, but Victoria interrupted with uncharacteristic gentleness. This isn't charity, Emily. This is business, good business. She pulled out another document, a preliminary course outline for a youth fashion design program. Your daughter has shown us that there's real demand for quality instruction in this community. Imagine combining your design expertise with Sophie's teaching ability. The morning unfolded with discussions of possibilities that had seemed impossible just days ago. Alexander arrived mid-morning, bringing with him Sarah Chen, the journalist who had covered Sophie's first sewing class. The story had generated unexpected interest, leading to inquiries from other communities about starting similar programs. People are inspired by what you've created here, Sarah explained, watching as Sophie's students arrived for their regular lesson. It's not just about sewing anymore, it's about community, about bridging divides. The class that day took on special significance as Emily, feeling stronger than usual, shared some of her design knowledge with the students. Her voice grew steadier as she explained the principles of pattern making, the importance of understanding how fabric moves and drapes. Every piece of clothing tells a story, she told the enthralled children. The way it's cut, the way it's sewn, these are like words in a language that speaks directly to the heart. Sophie watched her mother teach, seeing her in a new light. The passion that had made Emily a celebrated designer was still there, undimmed by illness or setback. It flowed through her words, inspiring the children in ways that went beyond mere technical instruction. Outside, the neighborhood had gathered as usual, but the atmosphere was different. Gertrude Wilkins stood among them, clutching an old magazine article she had found while cleaning her attic. It featured one of Emily's designs, a dress that had been worn at a prominent charity event years ago. I had no idea, Gertrude admitted to Mrs. Martinez, her voice carrying a note of genuine regret. All this time I thought, well, I was wrong about a lot of things. The afternoon brought more visitors, former clients of Emily's boutique who had read Sarah's article and recognized their beloved designer. They brought with them memories, photographs, and most importantly, stories of how Emily's work had touched their lives. One elderly woman, wearing a beautifully preserved Emily Turner original, tearfully described how Emily had created her daughter's wedding dress, working tirelessly to make it perfect, despite pressure from investors to cut corners. That's when I knew something was wrong at the boutique, the woman recalled. The new management didn't care about the stories behind the dresses, only the profits. They didn't understand that what Emily created wasn't just clothing. It was dreams made real. As the day drew to a close, Victoria gathered everyone in what would soon become the new studio space. Sophie's students proudly displayed their latest projects, while Emily, surrounded by evidence of her past achievements and present impact, allowed herself to imagine a future she had thought lost forever. Alexander watched the scene with satisfaction, noting how naturally Sophie moved between helping her students and supporting her mother. The girl's strength had never been in question, but now it was complemented by something new, a sense of heritage, of carrying forward a legacy while creating her own. In the gathering dusk, as the last visitors departed, Sophie found herself alone with her mother in their transformed living room. Emily held one of her old design sketches, preserved in a portfolio someone had brought. "Mom," Sophie said softly, "would you teach me? Not just sewing, but everything. Design, creativity, all of it?" Emily's smile carried all the warmth of renewed purpose. "My darling, I think we'll learn together. Sometimes the best designs come from combining something old with something new, just like we're doing now. The renovation of the new studio space progressed with remarkable speed thanks to Victoria's efficient management. The morning sun now streamed through large windows, illuminating workstations arranged in a thoughtful semicircle. Each station was equipped with proper tools and materials, but it was the wall of inspiration that drew everyone's attention, a carefully curated collection of Emily's original designs, interspersed with photographs of Sophie's students and their creations. Emily's health had shown subtle improvements since the introduction of the new specialist, and she now spent her mornings in a specially designed area of the studio. Her wheelchair had been replaced by a comfortable adjustable chair that allowed her to supervise and teach while managing her energy levels. The change in her was remarkable. Purpose had brought color back to her cheeks and strength to her voice. "Remember to feel the fabric," Emily instructed a group of advanced students one morning, her hands demonstrating the proper technique. "Each material has its own personality, its own way of moving. You need to understand it before you can work with it." Sophie moved among the younger students at their stations, her teaching style a perfect complement to her mother's. Where Emily provided the artistic vision, Sophie brought practical application, showing how to translate grand ideas into achievable steps. The morning's peace was interrupted by an unexpected visitor. A tall, distinguished man in an expensive suit stood in the doorway, his presence causing Emily to freeze mid-sentence. Sophie noticed her mother's reaction immediately, moving protectively to her side. "Emily," the man said softly, "it's been a long time." Victoria, who had been reviewing paperwork in her corner office, emerged quickly. "Mr. Richardson," she said, her tone professionally, neutral but with an underlying edge. "This is a surprise." James Richardson, the name clicked in Sophie's mind. She had seen it in the old papers, one of the investors who had forced her mother out of her own company. He looked older than in the photographs, his hair now grey, his face lined with what might have been regret. "I read the article," he explained, holding up Sarah Chen's latest piece about the studio. "I had to see for myself." His eyes took in the space, lingering on the wall of designs, his expression complex with emotions Sophie couldn't quite read. Emily's voice, when it came, was steady. "What do you want, James?" He moved further, into the room, careful to maintain a respectful distance, to apologize primarily, and perhaps to make amends. The students watched this exchange with wide eyes, sensing the importance of the moment, even if they didn't understand its full context. Mrs. Hernandez quietly began gathering them for their mid-morning break, her experienced intuition telling her that the adults needed privacy. "Amends?" Emily's laugh held no humor. "5 years too late, don't you think?" Richardson's shoulders sagged slightly. "Yes, probably, but seeing this," he gestured to the studio, to the students filing out, to the wall of designs. "This is what you always wanted, isn't it? Teaching, nurturing talent, maintaining quality over quantity. We should have listened." Sophie stood protectively near her mother's chair, watching this man who had played such a significant role in their journey to Edison Avenue. She saw something in his face, not just regret, but recognition. He was seeing what she and the Montgomerys had already discovered, the true value of her mother's vision. "The boutique failed, you know," he continued, his voice heavy. 6 months after you left. We tried running it the corporate way, faster production, cheaper materials, standardized designs. The customers knew the difference immediately. Your loyal clients left in droves." Victoria moved closer, her business instincts alert. "And now?" Richardson turned to her, acknowledging her role in this new venture. "Now I'm here to offer what I should have offered 5 years ago. Support without interference. The Emily Turner Design Academy has a nice ring to it, don't you think?" The silence that followed was profound. Sophie felt her mother's hand tighten on her arm, saw the complex play of emotions across her face. This was more than an apology or a business proposition. It was a chance to reclaim a dream on her own terms. Emily's response, when it came, carried all the quiet strength that had sustained her through years of illness and hardship. "Any investment would need to maintain our community focus," she said. "This isn't about profit margins anymore. It's about teaching, about Creating opportunities. Richardson nodded, a genuine smile softening his features. That's exactly what I was hoping you'd say. He reached into his briefcase, pulling out a folder. I've taken the liberty of drawing up a preliminary proposal. The Emily Turner Design Academy would remain entirely under your creative control, with the Montgomery Foundation maintaining oversight of operations. As Victoria moved to examine the documents, Sophie watched her mother's face. There was fear there, understandably, but also something else. A spark of the passion she'd seen in those old photographs, the creative fire that had made her a celebrated designer. The morning light streamed through the windows, catching the threads of silver in Emily's hair, illuminating the space that had already transformed so many lives. In that moment, Sophie understood that they were standing on the threshold of yet another beginning. The weeks following Richardson's visit brought a whirlwind of changes to Edison Avenue. The renovation plans expanded to include the entire building, transforming it into a proper design academy while maintaining its warm, community-focused atmosphere. Victoria's careful oversight ensured that every change enhanced rather than overshadowed the original spirit of Sophie's sewing classes. On a bright Tuesday morning, Sophie stood before her students, now divided into different skill levels and age groups. The advanced class, led by Emily, focused on design principles and creative expression, while Sophie's beginners learned the fundamental skills that had started her own journey. Today, Sophie announced to her group, her confidence growing with each session. We're going to learn about adapting patterns to different sizes. This is important because everyone deserves clothes that fit them perfectly. As she demonstrated the technique, Sophie caught glimpses of her mother working with the advanced students. Emily's health continued to improve gradually, her passion for teaching providing a strength that surprised even her doctors. The new medical treatments, combined with reduced stress and renewed purpose, had brought a vibrancy back to her that Sophie barely remembered. The morning's lessons were interrupted by an unexpected commotion outside. Gertrude Wilkins stood on the sidewalk, surrounded by a group of women Sophie had never seen before. But instead of her usual complaints, Gertrude was animatedly explaining the Academy's program to the visitors. Come in," she called out, catching Sophie's eye through the window with an apologetic smile. "Let me show you what they've created here." The visitors turned out to be representatives from a women's shelter in the next county, interested in starting a similar program for their residents. Gertrude, in a surprising turn of events, had become one of the Academy's most vocal advocates, particularly after Emily had helped her restore her mother's vintage wedding dress. Victoria arrived mid-morning, accompanied by Alexander and a film crew from a local documentary series. The story of Edison Avenue's transformation had caught the attention of educators and community developers across the state. Sarah Chen's articles had sparked a conversation about sustainable community development and the power of intergenerational teaching. "Remember," Emily addressed the advanced class, her voice carrying clearly through the studio, "fashion isn't just about creating beautiful clothes. It's about helping people feel confident, comfortable, and true to themselves." Sophie watched as one of her young students, Amy Peterson, helped a newer student thread a needle. The same girl who had once cried over tangled thread was now confidently teaching others, embodying the spirit of community that had made the Academy special. Mrs. Martinez arrived with her usual basket of snacks for the mid-morning break, but today she also brought exciting news. Her daughter, inspired by the Academy's success, had secured funding to start a similar program focusing on traditional Mexican embroidery techniques. "We're creating a network," Victoria explained to the documentary crew, her business acumen shining through. "Each community adapts the program to their specific needs and cultural heritage. It's not about replication, it's about inspiration and empowerment." The afternoon brought another surprise visitor, one of Emily's former clients, now a buyer for a major department store. She watched the classes with growing interest, particularly noting how the Academy balanced professional training with community engagement. "This is what the industry needs," she commented to Emily, "a return to quality, to personal connection. Would you consider developing a line of student-designed pieces for our stores? All proceeds could support scholarship programs for the Academy." Sophie, overhearing this conversation, felt a familiar protective instinct rise. But looking at her mother's face, she saw not stress or fear, but thoughtful consideration. Emily had learned from her past experiences and now had both Victoria's business expertise and Sophie's practical wisdom to help guide decisions. As the day drew to a close, the studio hummed with activity. Students gathered their projects, sharing plans for practice sessions at home. Parents lingered, discussing upcoming community events and workshop ideas. The documentary crew captured these natural interactions, understanding that the real story wasn't just about sewing or design. It was about how a community had transformed itself through shared purpose and mutual support. Emily called Sophie to her side as the last students departed. Together they looked out over their transformed space, not just a studio or school, but a living testament to resilience, creativity, and the power of teaching others to soar. "You know," Emily said, softly, "when I lost my boutique, I thought I'd lost everything. I never imagined that starting over in this tiny house on Edison Avenue would lead to something far more meaningful than success in the fashion world." Sophie leaned against her mother's chair, understanding perfectly. Their journey had been about so much more than survival or even redemption. It had been about finding strength in vulnerability, beauty in imperfection, and hope in the simple act of teaching others to create. The autumn breeze carried the sound of excitement through the open windows of the Emily Turner Design Academy. The studio buzzed with anticipation as students and parents gathered for a special announcement. Victoria Montgomery stood at the front of the room, her usual business attire softened by a handmade scarf, a gift from Sophie's advanced class. "Ladies and gentlemen," Victoria began, her voice carrying the weight of important news. "The Montgomery Foundation, in partnership with the State Education Board, has selected our academy as a model for a new type of community education initiative. Starting next semester, our program will be accredited, offering official certification in design and textile arts." The announcement was met with enthusiastic applause, but Sophie noticed her mother's slight tension. Accreditation meant standards, documentation, and oversight, elements that had contributed to the downfall of Emily's boutique. Yet this time was different. Victoria had spent months ensuring that the Academy's unique approach to teaching would be preserved. "Our curriculum will remain community-focused," Victoria continued, addressing the unspoken concerns. "The certification program will be optional, running alongside our existing classes. No one will be turned away for lack of funds or previous education." Emily relaxed visibly at these words, her hand finding Sophie's in a gentle squeeze. Their shared vision of accessible education had been protected, even as the academy grew beyond their initial dreams. The morning's excitement was amplified by the arrival of Mrs. Hernandez with an unexpected proposal. The elderly seamstress had been approached by several local high schools about creating satellite programs. "The students want to learn," Mrs. Hernandez explained, her eyes bright with possibility. "Not just sewing and design, but the values we teach here, patience, creativity, supporting one another." Sophie, now 12, had grown into her role as the Academy's youngest instructor. Her teaching style had evolved, incorporating elements of her mother's artistic vision with her own practical approach. Students often remarked that taking classes with both Sophie and Emily was like watching art and engineering dance together. The afternoon brought a visit from Sarah Chen, the journalist, whose articles had helped spread the Academy's story. She was working on a feature about educational innovation, focusing on how the Academy had created a new model for community-based learning. "What makes this place special," Sarah observed, watching Sophie guide a student through a complicated pattern, "is how it adapts to each person's needs while maintaining high standards. You've created something unique here." Emily, working with her advanced design students nearby, smiled at these words. "We learned from experience," she said, her voice stronger than it had been in years. "Success isn't about fitting people into a rigid system, it's about creating a system that helps people grow." The day's classes were interrupted by an unexpected delivery, large boxes containing professional-grade sewing machines and design software. A note from James Richardson explained that these were not a takeover attempt, but tools to support the Academy's growth on its own terms. Victoria examined the equipment with approval. "This is exactly what we need for the certification program," she noted. "And look, they're the same brand Emily used in her boutique, just updated models." Sophie watched as her mother ran her hands over the familiar machines, tears gathering in her eyes. "They remembered," Emily whispered. "These were always my favorites, precise but not too automated. They let you feel the fabric, work with it rather than force it." The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the studio as students experimented with the new equipment. Amy Peterson, now one of the Academy's star pupils, was teaching younger students how to use the machines properly. Her patience and gentleness reminded Sophie of how far they'd all come from that first day of tangled thread and tears. Gertrude Wilkins arrived later than usual, carrying a large box that she handled with obvious care. "I found these while cleaning. Out my attic," she explained, opening the box to reveal vintage fashion magazines from the 1950s. "I thought they might be useful for the history portion of the certification program." The magazines were a treasure trove of design evolution, showing how styles and techniques had changed over decades. Emily's eyes lit up as she paged through them, pointing out details to her advanced students. "See how the construction methods adapted to new materials? That's what we mean by evolution in design." As the day drew to a close, Sophie found herself standing beside her mother, watching their extended family of students and teachers prepare for home. The studio had become more than a school. It was a living laboratory of dreams and determination. "Mom," Sophie said softly, "do you ever miss your boutique, the glamour of high fashion?" Emily's answer was thoughtful, her gaze taking in the scene before them. The boutique was about creating beautiful things, but here we're creating beautiful possibilities. That's worth more than all the glamour in the world. The evening light painted the studio in warm gold, highlighting the wall of inspiration where Emily's original designs now hung alongside student work. Each piece told a story of growth, of challenges overcome, of dreams taking shape, stitch by stitch. Winter brought new energy to the Emily Turner Design Academy. The studio windows frosted with delicate patterns that seemed to mirror the intricate designs being created within. The certification program was set to launch in the spring, and preparations were in full swing. Sophie stood before her advanced class, now teaching specialized techniques she had developed by combining her mother's artistic approach with her own practical innovations. "Today," she announced, "we're going to learn about adaptive design, creating clothes that work for different body types and abilities." The lesson was inspired by a recent project where the Academy had partnered with a local rehabilitation center. The challenge of creating comfortable, stylish clothing for people with various physical needs had pushed their skills in new directions. Emily watched her daughter teach with quiet pride. Sophie had grown not just in height, but in presence, her natural talent for teaching, enhanced by genuine empathy and understanding. At 12, she carried herself with a grace that came from knowing her purpose. Victoria arrived mid-morning with exciting news. The documentary about the Academy had caught the attention of a major educational foundation. "They want to create a scholarship program," she explained, spreading the proposal across Emily's desk. "Full funding for students who want to pursue fashion design at the college level." The implications of this opportunity sent a ripple of excitement through the studio. For many of their students, college had seemed an impossible dream. Now, paths were opening that no one had dared imagine. Mrs. Martinez's daughter, Isabella, who had started the Mexican embroidery program, joined them for lunch. Her initiative had blossomed into a cultural exchange program, with students from both academies learning each other's techniques and traditions. "We're breaking down barriers," Isabella explained, showing photographs of her students incorporating traditional embroidery into modern designs. "These skills that our grandmothers feared would be lost are finding new life in contemporary fashion." The afternoon brought a surprise visit from James Richardson, but this time he wasn't alone. With him was Claire Bennett, Emily's former assistant from the boutique days. She had followed Emily's story through Sarah Chen's articles and had finally worked up the courage to visit. "I should have stood by you," Claire said, tears in her eyes as she hugged her former mentor. "When they started changing everything, cutting corners, I knew it was wrong, but I was afraid." Emily's forgiveness was immediate and genuine. "We all make choices based on where we are in life," she said softly. "What matters is what we choose to do next." Claire had brought with her a portfolio of designs, evolution of Emily's original work, maintained in secret over the years. "I kept developing your ideas," she explained. "Not for production, just to keep the vision alive. Maybe now they could be part of the Academy's advanced curriculum." The studio hummed with activity as students gathered around Claire's portfolio, asking questions and offering observations. Sophie noticed how naturally her mother fell into collaboration with her former assistant, their creative energy rekindling as if no time had passed. Gertrude Wilkins arrived with her usual impeccable timing, bringing news from her latest community outreach effort. The Academy's success had inspired other neighborhoods to explore similar programs, focusing on different traditional crafts and skills. "We're creating a network," Gertrude explained, her former criticism transformed into passionate advocacy. "Each community brings its own expertise, its own traditions, but we all share the same goal, teaching skills that build confidence and connection." As the winter day drew to an early close, the studio lights created a warm glow visible from the street. Inside, Sophie's youngest students were presenting their first completed projects to their families, the pride on their faces reflected in their parents' eyes, creating moments of pure joy that defined the Academy's true purpose. Emily called everyone together for an impromptu celebration. Hot chocolate was served as Claire shared stories from the boutique days, now transformed from painful memories into valuable lessons. Students listened intently, understanding that they were part of a continuing story of creativity and resilience. Victoria, watching the scene with satisfaction, pulled Sophie aside. "You know," she said quietly, "when Alexander first told me about you and your mother, I thought he was just indulging in another charitable project. I've never been happier to be wrong." Sophie smiled, remembering the pristine businesswoman who had first visited their small house. "We all learn from each other," she replied, wisdom beyond her years evident in her voice. "That's what makes this place special." The evening ended with an impromptu fashion show, students modeling their latest creations. Emily, seated in her special chair, provided commentary that blended technical expertise with genuine appreciation for each student's unique vision. As the last families departed, Sophie and Emily remained in the studio, surrounded by the day's creative energy. The wall of inspiration had grown to include Claire's preserved designs, creating a bridge between past and future that felt both healing and hopeful. "You know what I love most about teaching here," Emily said, watching Sophie organize materials for the next day's classes. "Every day we get to see people discover their own strength, their own beauty. That's worth more than any fashion empire." Sophie nodded, understanding perfectly. Their journey had transformed not just their lives, but an entire community's perception of what was possible. The Emily Turner Design Academy had become more than a school. It was a testament to the power of teaching with love, learning with purpose, and growing together through creativity and compassion. Spring arrived at Edison Avenue with an unexpected challenge. The success of the Emily Turner Design Academy had drawn attention from a large corporate fashion institute interested in acquiring their teaching model. Their representative, Marcus Sterling, arrived on a sunny morning in an expensive suit that seemed out of place in the warm, creative atmosphere of the studio. "Your results are impressive," Sterling said, reviewing the Academy's achievement records. "Our institute could implement this program on a much larger scale. We have facilities across the country." Victoria Montgomery, sitting beside Emily and Sophie in the conference room they'd recently added, maintained a professional smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. She recognized the familiar corporate language that had once threatened Emily's boutique. "Scale isn't our primary concern," Emily responded carefully, her voice steady. "Our success comes from maintaining personal connections, understanding each student's unique needs. Sophie, now approaching her 13th birthday, watched the interaction with keen awareness. She had grown not just in height, but in understanding, recognizing the subtle tensions in the room. Her hand found her mother's under the table, offering silent support. Of course, Sterling agreed smoothly. We would maintain the community aspect, but imagine reaching thousands of students instead of dozens. Isn't that what teaching is all about? Before anyone could respond, a commotion from the main studio drew their attention. Amy Peterson's voice carried clearly. No, you're holding the fabric wrong. Here, let me show you. Feel how it wants to move? Through the conference room's window, they could see Amy guiding a younger student through a difficult technique. The patience in her demonstration, the genuine desire to help others succeed. It was everything their academy stood for. Mr. Sterling, Sophie spoke up, her young voice clear and confident. Would you like to observe one of our classes, see how we actually work? The corporate representative agreed, though his expression suggested he was merely humoring a child. As they entered the main studio space, the energy of creative learning enveloped them. Students of various ages worked together, sharing techniques and encouragement. Mrs. Hernandez moved among them, offering guidance that went beyond mere instruction to touch on life lessons. At one station, Isabella Martinez was teaching a fusion class, showing how traditional Mexican embroidery could enhance contemporary designs. The results were stunning, clothes that told stories of heritage while embracing modern style. Watch this, Sophie said, leading Sterling to where Gertrude Wilkins was working with a group of elderly residents. The women were creating adaptive clothing for patients at the local rehabilitation center, combining practical needs with beautiful design elements. Each piece is a solution to someone's specific challenge, Gertrude explained, demonstrating how a seemingly decorative element cleverly concealed an easy access opening. We're not just teaching sewing, we're teaching people to see problems as opportunities for creativity. Sterling's expression began to shift as they moved through the studio. He watched as Claire Bennett, now a regular instructor, helped students develop their own design innovations. The wall of inspiration had grown to include not just Emily's original work, but student creations that had won recognition in state competitions. Victoria noticed the change in Sterling's demeanor. You see, she said quietly, what makes this academy special isn't something that can be franchised. It's about relationships, understanding, and genuine care for each person's growth. The afternoon brought another dimension to their visitors' education. Sarah Chen arrived with her latest article about the Academy's impact on the community. Local businesses reported increased activity, property values had risen without displacing residents, and, most importantly, the sense of community had strengthened across traditional social boundaries. We received 15 similar offers last month, Victoria revealed to Sterling as they watched a student presentation. Each one promising to take our program to the next level. But what these corporations don't understand is that we're not interested in levels, we're interested in depth. Emily, teaching her advanced design class, called Sophie over to demonstrate a technique they had developed together. A perfect blend of artistic vision and practical application. The corporate representative watched as mother and daughter worked in seamless harmony, their teaching styles complementing each other naturally. Your institute's offer is generous, Emily said later as they concluded their tour. But this academy isn't just about teaching fashion design. It's about creating a space where everyone can grow, learn, and contribute to something larger than themselves. Sterling stood at the studio's entrance, looking back at the vibrant scene of creative education in action. His polished corporate demeanor had softened, replaced by what might have been understanding, or perhaps regret for what his own institute had lost in its pursuit of scale. You've built something remarkable here, he admitted, something that perhaps shouldn't be replicated but rather inspired by. As he departed, Sophie and Emily exchanged knowing smiles. They had faced down another challenge, not through confrontation, but by simply staying true to their principles. The afternoon sun streamed through the windows, highlighting the busy studio where dreams were being stitched together with thread, creativity, and unwavering dedication to genuine human connection. The summer fashion show had become the Emily, Turner Design Academy's signature event, but this year was different. The studio buzzed with unprecedented energy as students prepared for their first major showcase since receiving accreditation. The event would feature designs from every level of the program, from beginners to advanced certification candidates. Sophie moved through the organized chaos with practiced ease, her presence calming nervous students as they made final adjustments to their creations. At 13, she had grown into a poised young woman who balanced teaching responsibilities with her own continuing education. "Remember," she told a group of anxious first-year students, "this show isn't about perfection. It's about celebrating your journey and sharing your unique vision." Emily, supervising the advanced students' collection, felt a surge of pride watching her daughter. Sophie had inherited her eye for design, but had developed her own gift for nurturing others' talents. The merger of their teaching styles had created something neither could have achieved alone. Victoria arrived early, bringing unexpected news that added extra excitement to the day. "The State Education Board was so impressed with our certification program that they want to use it as a model for other vocational training initiatives," she announced during the morning meeting. The implications of this recognition rippled through the academy. What had started as a small community project had grown into something that could influence educational policy across the state. Yet the heart of their mission remained unchanged, providing accessible, quality education that empowered students to discover their potential. As the afternoon approached, guests began arriving. Local business owners who had supported the academy from its early days mingled with education officials and fashion industry representatives. Sarah Chen was there with her camera crew, documenting the evolution of what she called the Edison Avenue Renaissance. Among the guests was a surprise visitor. Marcus Sterling had returned, this time without his corporate agenda. He had brought his teenage daughter, Emma, who dreamed of studying fashion but felt stifled by traditional education methods. "I kept thinking about what I saw here," he explained to Emily. "The way you teach, it's what education should be." The fashion show itself was a celebration of diversity and creativity. Students of all ages presented designs that told stories of their communities, their challenges, and their dreams. Mrs. Martinez's daughter, Isabella, had coordinated a special segment featuring fusion designs that blended cultural traditions with contemporary styles. Amy Peterson's collection drew particular attention. She had created adaptive wear for children with special needs, incorporating playful elements that made the clothes both functional and fun. Her presentation included a video showing her design process, including interviews with the children who had inspired her work. "This is why we do what we do," Emily whispered to Sophie as they watched Amy receive a standing ovation. "It's not about the clothes. It's about helping people find their way to help others." The evening's highlight was a special presentation that caught everyone by surprise. The advanced students had collaborated on a collection inspired by Emily's original boutique designs, updated with techniques they had learned at the academy. As the pieces moved down the runway, Emily's journey from high fashion designer to beloved teacher was honored in every stitch and seam. Claire Bennett, watching from beside Emily, squeezed her former mentor's hand. "You always said fashion should tell a story," she remembered. "Look at all the stories being told here tonight." The success of the fashion show sparked new opportunities. Local businesses proposed internship programs for advanced students. The Rehabilitation Center wanted to expand their partnership to include design workshops for their patients. Even Gertrude Wilkins, who had once been their strongest critic, presented a proposal for a senior citizens design program. As the evening wound down, Sophie found herself standing with her mother in their favorite spot by the windows. The studio lights reflected off the glass, creating a mirror effect that showed both the vibrant present and the memories of where they had started. "Do you remember that first day Mr. Montgomery found me cleaning the house?" Sophie asked softly. "I was so scared we'd lose everything." Emily pulled her daughter close, Instead, we found everything: purpose, community, a way to help others find their strength. Victoria joined them, having finished speaking with the Education Board representatives. "You know what impressed them most?" she said. "Not the technical skills or the certification rates, though those are exceptional. It was the way this place transforms lives." Outside, the summer evening had painted the sky in colors that reminded Sophie of her favorite fabrics, soft pinks blending into deep purples. Students and their families lingered on the sidewalk, talking excitedly about future projects and possibilities. Mrs. Hernandez approached with a small gift box. "For you, pequeña maestra," she said to Sophie. Inside was a beautiful antique thimble engraved with delicate patterns. "My grandmother gave this to me when I started teaching. Now it's your turn to carry the tradition." The simple gift captured everything the Academy stood for: the passing of knowledge, the honoring of tradition while embracing the future, the understanding that teaching was about more than just sharing skills. It was about connecting generations, preserving wisdom, and creating space for new dreams to take root and flourish. The autumn leaves danced past the Academy's windows as Sophie prepared for her most challenging class yet. At 13, she had been invited to give a special workshop at the state's annual Education Innovation Conference. The topic: Youth Leadership in Community Education. The studio had become a second home to dozens of students, but today it felt different. Emily watched from her customary spot as Sophie arranged her materials, noting how her daughter's movements carried a new confidence. The thin, serious child who had once cleaned floors now stood tall, her presence drawing others naturally to her. "Remember when we worried about her missing out on childhood?" Victoria said softly to Emily, having arrived early to help prepare for the day. "Look at her now. She didn't miss out. She just found a different way to grow." The morning's special guests began arriving, educators from across the state, each interested in learning how the Academy had achieved its remarkable results. Among them was Dr. Rebecca Chen, a renowned expert in alternative education methods, and as it happened, Sarah Chen's mother. "I've read every article my daughter wrote about this place," Dr. Chen said, watching Sophie guide her regular morning class through a complex pattern-making exercise. "But seeing it in action, it's extraordinary how you've created such a natural learning environment." The students, initially nervous about their audience, soon forgot the visitors as they immersed themselves in their work. Amy Peterson was teaching younger students how to adapt designs for different needs, her genuine enthusiasm infectious. In another corner, Isabella Martinez conducted a bilingual lesson on traditional embroidery techniques, bridging cultural gaps with needle and thread. Emily's health had improved enough that she now taught extended sessions, though she still managed her energy carefully. Her advanced design class had become known for its innovative approach to sustainable fashion, combining environmental consciousness with practical beauty. "The key," Sophie explained to the visiting educators, "is that we never treat anyone as just a student or just a teacher. Everyone here has something to learn and something to share." As if to demonstrate this principle, Gertrude Wilkins arrived with an unexpected contribution. She had discovered a collection of wartime patterns showing how communities had adapted clothing during material shortages. "History teaches us about resilience," she explained, her former criticism transformed into passionate advocacy for preserving practical knowledge. The afternoon brought another surprise. James Richardson returned, not with business proposals, but with his granddaughter Emma, who had been inspired by the summer fashion show to start a similar program at her school. She had brought a portfolio of her students' work, seeking guidance on how to nurture their creative growth while maintaining academic standards. Sophie took special interest in Emma's project, remembering her own early days of teaching. "The most important thing," she advised, "is to listen to your students. Their challenges often lead to the most innovative solutions." Victoria, observing this interaction, shared a meaningful look with Alexander, who had joined them for the afternoon session. Their initial investment in a small community project had yielded returns they could never have predicted, not in financial terms, but in human potential realized. The day's activities were documented not just by Sarah Chen's usual thoughtful reporting, but by a team from the State Education Department. They were particularly interested in how the academy had integrated traditional academic subjects into practical skills training. "Watch this," Sophie said, directing their attention to a group of students calculating fabric requirements. They're using geometry and algebra naturally, solving real problems that matter to them. The mathematics becomes meaningful because they can see its immediate application. Mrs. Hernandez, working with her intermediate class, demonstrated how reading comprehension improved when students engaged with historical fashion texts and technical instructions. "They learn because they want to understand," she explained, "not because they're told they must." As the afternoon progressed, Emily called everyone together for a special announcement. The academy had been selected to participate in an international education exchange program. Students and teachers from similar community-based schools around the world would visit throughout the coming year, sharing techniques and cultural perspectives. "This is more than an educational opportunity," Emily explained, her voice strong, with purpose. "It's a chance to show how small community initiatives can have global impact." The news energized the studio. Students immediately began planning cultural integration projects, while teachers discussed ways to incorporate diverse teaching methods into their curricula. The visiting educators watched in amazement as spontaneous learning opportunities emerged from the excitement. Sophie found herself standing beside her mother as the day drew to a close, watching their extended family of students and teachers share ideas and dreams. The thin autumn sunlight painted everything in warm gold, highlighting the wall of inspiration where their journey had begun. "You know what makes me proudest?" Emily said softly, reaching for her daughter's hand. "Not the recognition or the success, but the way you've helped create a place where everyone can find their strength." The evening ended with an impromptu gathering in the studio's community space. Students shared traditional foods from their cultures, teachers exchanged teaching tips with their visiting colleagues, and the air hummed with the energy of possibilities yet to be explored. Dr. Chen, preparing to leave, paused beside Sophie. "You've achieved something remarkable here," she said thoughtfully. "You've shown that education isn't about age or authority. It's about creating spaces where everyone can teach and learn together." As the last visitors departed, Sophie stood at the window, watching the autumn leaves dance in the evening light. The studio behind her was quiet now, but she could feel the echoes of the day's energy, the countless threads of connection that had been strengthened and new ones just beginning to form. Winter transformed Edison Avenue into a wonderland of frost and possibility. The Emily Turner Design Academy glowed with warmth against the cold, its windows steamed with creative energy from the busy studios within. The International Exchange Program had brought new voices and perspectives, enriching the Academy's community in unexpected ways. Sophie stood before a mixed group of local and international students, demonstrating a technique that blended traditional craftsmanship with modern technology. At 13, she had grown into her role as a bridge between generations and cultures, helping others find their own path to expression and growth. "Fashion isn't just about clothes," she explained, echoing her mother's wisdom while adding her own insight. "It's about finding ways to make life more beautiful and accessible for everyone." The morning's special project involved creating adaptive winterwear for children at the Rehabilitation Center. Students from Japan had brought innovative fabric technologies, while visitors from Peru shared traditional Andean techniques for working with natural fibers. The combination of approaches led to designs that were both practical and uniquely beautiful. Emily, working with advanced students nearby, felt her heart swell with pride as she watched Sophie guide the international collaboration. Her daughter had not only preserved the Academy's founding principles, but had helped them evolve into something even more meaningful. Victoria arrived mid-morning with exciting news. The Education Exchange Program had caught the attention of UNESCO, which was interested in documenting the Academy's approach to cultural preservation through practical education. "They're particularly impressed by how you've maintained local community connections while expanding globally," Victoria explained, watching as Mrs. Martinez and a visiting instructor from Mexico City demonstrated different regional embroidery styles. The afternoon brought an unexpected reunion. Claire Bennett returned from a teaching assignment in Europe, where she had been sharing the Academy's methods with fashion schools in Paris and Milan. She brought with her a surprise, a portfolio of student work inspired by Emily's original designs. "Your influence has spread further than you imagine," Claire told Emily, spreading out photographs of European students creating their own community-based programs. They call it the Edison method, teaching fashion as a way to build connections and solve real problems. Sophie was particularly moved by one project. A Swiss student had created a program teaching refugee women to adapt their traditional clothing techniques to local markets, helping them maintain cultural connections while building new lives. "This is what we dreamed of," Emily said softly, watching as students from 4 continents collaborated on a complex pattern, not just teaching skills, but helping people find ways to lift each other up. The day's activities were interrupted by an impromptu celebration. Amy Peterson had received news that her adaptive clothing designs had been accepted for a major international competition. More importantly, she had insisted that all proceeds from her work would go towards scholarships for the Academy's special needs program. Gertrude Wilkins, who had become one of the Academy's most dedicated volunteers, organized the celebration with characteristic efficiency. Students and teachers gathered in the community space, sharing food and stories that bridged cultural differences with the universal languages of creativity and care. The evening brought another milestone. The first graduates of the certification program were preparing to start their own community initiatives. Each had developed a unique approach based on local needs, while maintaining the core principles they had learned at the Academy. "You've created something that grows stronger by sharing," Alexander observed, watching the graduation preparations. "The more it spreads, the more it enriches everyone involved." As winter darkness fell early outside, the studio remained bright with activity. International students taught local children games from their countries, while experienced craftspeople exchanged techniques that had been passed down through generations. The air was filled with languages from around the world, all united by the common thread of creative purpose. Sophie found a quiet moment with her mother near their favorite window. The frost had created delicate patterns on the glass, nature's own lesson in design and beauty. "Sometimes I wonder," Sophie said softly, "what would have happened if Mr. Montgomery hadn't found us that day?" Emily squeezed her daughter's hand, understanding the depth of the question. "He didn't just find us, sweetheart. He saw us, really saw what we could become, and now we do the same for others." The evening ended with a special presentation. Students from each participating country had collaborated on a single piece, a magnificent quilt that told the story of their shared journey. Each panel represented a different culture's approach to textile arts, yet together they created something entirely new and beautiful. "This is the real legacy of the Emily Turner Design Academy," Victoria said, as they admired the finished piece. "Not just the skills we teach or the certificates we award, but the ways we help people weave their stories together into something stronger." As the last students departed for the day, their voices carrying different accents but shared enthusiasm, Sophie and Emily stood in their transformed studio. The space that had once been a small house on Edison Avenue had become a global classroom, yet it had never lost its heart. The simple belief that everyone deserves a chance to create beauty and share their gifts with the world. Spring returned to Edison Avenue with a special significance. The Emily Turner Design Academy was preparing for its 5th anniversary celebration, an event that would bring together everyone who had been part of their remarkable journey. The studio, now expanded to occupy most of the building, hummed with anticipation and purpose. Sophie, now 14, stood in the original workspace where everything had begun. The small sewing table where she had once struggled to make ends meet remained in place, not just as a memorial, but as a reminder of how far they had come and the importance of staying true to their roots. "Every dream starts somewhere," she told a group of new students, her voice carrying the wisdom of experience. "This table was our beginning. It taught me that size doesn't matter as much as dedication and heart." Emily, whose health had stabilized thanks to continued treatment and reduced stress, worked with her advanced students on a special anniversary, collection. Each piece would tell part of their story, from the desperate days of cleaning houses to the international success they now enjoyed. Victoria arrived early that morning, carrying a thick folder of press clippings and photographs. Sarah Chen wants to create a documentary, she explained, spreading out the materials. Not just about the academy, but about how small acts of kindness can transform entire communities. The morning's activities were interrupted by an unexpected procession. Led by Mrs. Martinez and Gertrude Wilkins, the neighbors began arriving with photographs, old sewing projects, and stories to share. Each contribution added another layer to the rich tapestry of their shared history. "Remember when you fixed my mother's curtains?" Mrs. Peterson asked Sophie, holding up the still pristine fabric. "That wasn't just about mending cloth, it was about mending our community's faith in itself." The afternoon brought more visitors. James Richardson and Claire Bennett arrived with a surprise. They had tracked down many of Emily's original boutique clients. These women, now supporters of the Academy's mission, brought with them the vintage Emily Turner designs they had preserved over the years. "We kept them," one elegant grandmother explained, "because they weren't just clothes. They were art that told our stories. That's what you're teaching here now, how to tell stories through creation." As the day progressed, the studio filled with people whose lives had been touched by the Academy. Amy Peterson, now preparing to attend design school on a full scholarship, demonstrated her latest adaptive wear innovations to a group of international buyers. Her designs would soon be available in stores across the country, with proceeds supporting similar programs worldwide. Isabella Martinez had expanded her cultural fusion program to include traditional techniques from dozens of countries. Her students presented a fashion show that celebrated diversity while highlighting the universal elements of human creativity and resilience. Alexander Montgomery, watching the presentations with quiet satisfaction, shared a moment with Sophie near the window where they had first discussed her future. "Did you ever imagine," he asked, "that helping one small family could lead to all this?" Sophie's response was thoughtful. "You didn't just help us survive, Mr. Montgomery. You showed us how to dream bigger than our circumstances. Now we get to do the same for others." The evening celebration reached its peak with a special announcement. The State Education Board, in partnership with several international organizations, had officially recognized the Edison method as an innovative approach to community education. Schools around the world would receive support to implement programs based on the Academy's principles. Emily, standing beside her daughter at the podium, felt tears of joy as she addressed the gathered crowd. "5 years ago, we were just trying to keep a roof over our heads. Today, we're helping build bridges between cultures and generations. But our greatest achievement isn't in the programs we've created or the recognition we've received. It's in the lives we've touched and the dreams we've helped nurture." Victoria, who had once questioned her brother's involvement with a small house on Edison Avenue, now stood proudly with the family she had come to love. "Sometimes," she admitted, "the best business decisions have nothing to do with profit margins. They're about recognizing the value of human potential and having the courage to invest in hope." As the celebration continued into the evening, Sophie found a quiet moment in her original workspace. The old sewing table, now surrounded by state-of-the-art equipment and international awards, remained the heart of everything they had built. Mrs. Hernandez joined her there, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. "You know what makes this place special, Pequeña Maestra? It's not the fancy machines or the global recognition. It's that we never forgot what it means to help someone believe in themselves." The spring evening painted the studio in soft colors, highlighting the wall of inspiration that had grown to include hundreds of photographs, designs, and stories. Each image represented a life touched, a dream supported, a barrier overcome through creativity and compassion. The final day of the Aish anniversary celebration dawned bright and clear. The Emily Turner Design Academy stood proudly on Edison Avenue, its windows reflecting the morning sun like a beacon of possibility. Inside, Sophie and Emily prepared for the day's culminating event, a special ceremony that would mark not just their past achievements, but the beginning of a new chapter. Today, Sophie addressed the gathered crowd, her young voice carrying the confidence of experience. We're not just celebrating what we've built. We're celebrating what happens when a community believes in its power to create change. The studio had been transformed for the occasion. Along one wall, a timeline told their story through photographs and artifacts, from Sophie's first sewing projects to the international programs they had inspired. Each image captured a moment of transformation, not just in their lives but in the lives of countless others. Victoria Montgomery, standing beside her brother Alexander, watched as students from around the world demonstrated techniques they had learned and taught each other. "Remember when we thought this was just about helping one family?" she whispered. "Look at what it became." The morning's presentations highlighted the Academy's impact beyond fashion and design. Teachers from local schools shared how the Edison method had transformed their approach to education. Healthcare workers from the Rehabilitation Center demonstrated how adaptive clothing projects had improved their patients' quality of life. Emily, seated in her special chair now adorned with students' handcrafted decorations, felt overwhelming gratitude as she watched her daughter guide the proceedings. Sophie had grown into a remarkable young woman, carrying forward their shared vision while adding her own wisdom and inspiration. "The true measure of success," Emily addressed the gathering, "isn't in what we achieve for ourselves, but in how we help others discover their own potential." The afternoon brought a series of announcements that would ensure the Academy's legacy. The Montgomery Foundation, in partnership with international education organizations, had established a permanent endowment to support similar initiatives worldwide. The Sophie Turner Scholarship would provide opportunities for young innovators who showed the same spirit of determination and community service that had inspired their journey. Gertrude Wilkins, once their strongest critic and now one of their most passionate advocates, presented a community history project she had coordinated. "Edison Avenue wasn't just transformed by this Academy," she explained. "We were transformed by the reminder that every person has value, every story matters, and every community holds unlimited potential." As the day progressed, more stories emerged. Amy Peterson shared how her adaptive clothing line had expanded to include designs by other Academy students, creating opportunities for creative problem-solving that benefited people around the world. Isabella Martinez described cultural exchange programs that had helped preserve traditional techniques while fostering innovation and understanding. The evening's final event was a fashion show unlike any other. Instead of professional models, community members of all ages and abilities wore designs created by Academy students. Each piece told a story of collaboration, creativity, and care for others' needs. Claire Bennett, who had once witnessed the fall of Emily's boutique, now stood proudly with her former mentor. "We lost something valuable back then," she reflected, "but we found something even more precious here, the understanding that true success comes from lifting others as we rise." As the celebration drew to a close, Sophie found herself back at the small sewing table where everything had begun. The worn surface held memories of desperate times, but also of hope, determination, and the power of small acts of kindness to change lives. "You know what I've learned?" she said to her mother, who had joined her there. "That table wasn't just about survival. It was our first classroom, teaching us that everyone has something to give and something to learn." Emily wrapped her arm around her daughter's shoulders, both of them watching as their extended family of students, teachers and supporters, shared final moments of the celebration. "And look at all the lessons we've shared since then," she said softly. The studio lights painted warm patterns across the floor, highlighting the international quilt that now hung proudly on the wall, a testament to the connections they had, fostered across cultures and generations. Each panel told a story of growth, of dreams taking flight, of lives transformed through creativity and compassion. Victoria approached with one final surprise. Sarah Chen's documentary about their journey would be shared with education initiatives around the world, spreading the message that community transformation begins with believing in each person's potential to create positive change. As the last, Guests departed. Sophie stood at the window where she had once watched her small world with worry and fear. Now she looked out at a community transformed by love, dedication, and the simple belief that everyone deserves a chance to create beauty in their own way. "Ready for tomorrow?" Emily asked, joining her daughter at the window. Sophie smiled, understanding that their story wasn't ending. It was evolving, growing, touching more lives with each passing day. "Ready for whatever comes next," she replied, "as long as we keep teaching, learning, and believing in each other." The evening. Light painted Edison Avenue in soft colors, highlighting the changes that 5 years had brought. Where there had once been division and doubt, now stood a testament to the power of community, creativity, and unwavering hope. The Emily Turner Design Academy had become more than a school. It was a beacon of possibility, a reminder that the smallest acts of kindness could blossom into worldwide change.